I've got a confession, and it's one that might get me kicked out of the retro gaming club. You see, I never played Chrono Trigger back in the 90s when it first came out. I know. For a channel called Retro Gaming Boss, that's almost blasphemy. But see, I was a Sega kid growing up. The Genesis was my console, and it kept me busy blasting through Sonic and Streets of Rage, while everyone else was experiencing what many call the greatest RPG ever made. I remember seeing the screenshots in magazines, that anime art style, the character with the spiky hair, the time travel gameplay, and thinking it looked kind of interesting, but back then, I didn't have a Super Nintendo, and by the time I could have picked it up, the PlayStation era was already in full swing. It wasn't until 2020 that I finally sat down and played it. You remember 2020, right? Things were closed all over the place, people were stuck at home, nowhere to go, with nothing but time on your hands. And it was then when I thought to myself, when are you gonna stop watching so many cat videos and finally play through Chrono Trigger? The game kept popping up on every best of list I saw. It was unavoidable. So I finally did what I now realized I should have done 25 years earlier. I started the game with some pretty high expectations and was prepared to see what all the fuss was about. And let me tell you, by the time the credits rolled, I felt like I had missed out on something special. I mean, it was just so much fun from start to finish. And in this video, I want to share my personal experience and reactions to this masterpiece to explain why it's earned such an incredible reputation. So first, let's talk about how this thing got made, because the story is almost as epic as the game itself. Back in the early 90s, Squaresoft ruled the RPG scene on the SNES with classics like Secret of Mana in 1993 and the unforgettable Final Fantasy VI in 1994. But even before those games, way back in 1992, Square had a crazy idea. What if they took the creators from Final Fantasy and Dragon's Quest, and the artist behind Dragon Ball, and locked them all in a room together? That's exactly what they did. Hironobu Sakaguchi, Yuji Horii, and Akira Toriyama, they called them the Dream Team, and for good reason. Not that Dream Team. That Dream Team. Sakaguchi wanted this game to be the perfect fusion of Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest. He wanted the cinematic storytelling of Final Fantasy and the accessible charm of Dragon Quest, all wrapped up in a time-traveling package. But here's the thing. Bringing three massive creative forces together wasn't some smooth collaborative process. One of the game's directors even said that just planning the game took an entire year. An entire year of non-stop meetings. Let that sink in. For most games, the full development cycle is maybe 2 or 3 years. Here, they spent a year just talking about what they wanted to make. The actual development only took about another year after that. And even then, it almost fell apart. Sakaguchi himself said this was the most difficult game he's ever worked on. He even said it almost became a mediocre game and they had to tear the whole project down and start from scratch. Imagine that for a second. Imagine a world where Chrono Trigger was just okay. We got lucky they didn't give up. Now, one thing that always gets me about this period in gaming is the sheer scale of the ambition. The Super Nintendo was a powerful machine, but it had its limits. The cartridge for Chrono Trigger was 32 megabits. That's 4 megabytes of data. It doesn't sound like much today, but back then, that was massive. To put it in perspective, Super Mario World was only about 4 megabits. They crammed an entire epic RPG into a space that was 8 times bigger than one of the best platformers on the system. That's the kind of technical wizardry we're talking about. But put the technical stuff aside, and I think a big part of what makes Chrono Trigger such a joy are the unforgettable main characters that you can choose from on your team. Chrono is the ultimate silent protagonist who apparently lets his spiky red hair and katana do all the talking. He's just a normal kid who wakes up late, but he ends up being an absolute beast in battle with his crazy lightning magic. And some trivia for you. In the original 1995 Super Nintendo release, the English version of the game limited character names to exactly 5 letters. Because Chrono has 6 letters, the translators had to drop the H in it to make it fit. Even though modern ports like the Nintendo DS, PC, and mobile versions no longer have that strict 5-letter text limit, Square kept Chrono as the default English spelling out of tradition, which is a nice touch. On to Luca, who is Chrono's brilliant, nerdy best friend who wears huge glasses and literally builds a time machine in her spare time. She brings a gun and a literal flamethrower to a sword fight. Frog is a literal frog knight from the Middle Ages who speaks like he's in a Shakespeare play. He's brooding and tragic, but he wields a massive, legendary sword and uses water magic to wash away enemies. More on Frog in a bit. Robo is a broken robot from a bleak, ruined future that Luca fixes up, and he instantly becomes the sweetest, most loyal friend ever. He doesn't have magic, but he compensates by firing literal lasers and rocket-punching bad guys. Isla is a fierce cavewoman chief from prehistoric times who doesn't use weapons because her bare fists hit harder than anyone else's swords. And she loves partying, drinking, and is basically a hyper-fast ball of pure physical power. And last we have Magus, who will always be the ultimate edgy, goth anti-hero who starts out as the main villain but can join your team later. He floats around with a scythe. He has amazing purple hair and he unleashes devastating shadow magic while looking incredibly cool. But now, let's get into why it actually feels so amazing to play this thing. If you grew up with RPGs, you're probably familiar with the active time battle system. Final Fantasy made it famous, but Chrono Trigger took it and made it their own. The first thing you'll notice is that there are no random battles. You can actually see the enemies on the map, so you can choose to fight them or you can try to avoid them. It gave you a sense of control that a lot of RPGs just didn't have at the time. And when you do engage in battle, it happens right there on the same map you're exploring. There's no jarring transition to a separate battle screen. It feels seamless, like the adventure never really stops. For a 16-bit game, that was a great step forward. But the real genius is the tech system. Each character has their own set of special moves. Chrono's got Cyclone. Luca has Flame Toss. Frog has Slurp Cut. On their own they're useful, but here's where it gets interesting. You can combine them. Chrono's Cyclone plus Luca's Flame Toss will give you Fire Whirl. Frog's Slurp Cut plus Chrono's Slash gives you X-Strike. And if you get 3 characters together, you can pull off triple techs that are absolutely devastating. The first time I executed a triple tech, I remember just sitting there grinning like an idiot. It felt like I'd discovered something secret, something the game was rewarding me for figuring out. It made battles feel strategic and collaborative, not just a bunch of characters taking turns whittling down each other's hit points. There's something like 50 different techs in the game, with dozens of combinations depending on who's in your party. That kind of depth was almost unheard of at the time. Every character felt useful, and switching party members actually changed how you approached combat. But the combat, as good as it is, was only half the story. The real hook is the time travel. Forget what you thought you knew about RPGs, moving from town to town in a linear manner. Here, you're jumping between 7 different areas. You start in 1000 AD, but soon you're in 65 million BC fighting dinosaurs, and then you're in a post-apocalyptic 2300 AD, trying to figure out what destroyed the world. The scope is pretty staggering for a 16-bit game. And here's where it gets really clever. Your actions in the past have real consequences in the future. You might do something small in 600 AD, like planting a seed or saving a character. And then, when you jump forward to 1000 AD, that seed has grown into a forest, or that character's descendants are thanking you. This type of thoughtful design is used to cleverly connect points in time across the entire story. And the way that you travel is just as cool. You've got these portals called time gates that pop up throughout the world, and eventually, you get a time machine called the Epoch that can fly through different eras. There's a moment about halfway through the game where you take off in the Epoch and the music kicks in and you realize you can go anywhere at any time. It's one of those moments that still gives me chills when I remember first experiencing it. But the biggest mind-bender? The game has multiple endings, and I'm not talking about 2 or 3. There are 12 unique endings in the original and 13 in the Nintendo DS version. The ending you get depends on when and how you decide to fight the final boss. Do you fight him early on? Do you wait until you've done every side quest? Each choice leads to a completely different conclusion. It's a level of replayability that was almost unheard of, especially for a 16-bit game. And I'll admit, the first time I played it, I didn't even know there were multiple endings. I just assumed there was one way to finish the game. When I found out there were a dozen, I went back and started a New Game Plus run immediately. And that's another great thing. New Game Plus. You keep all of your levels and equipment and can replay the entire game with your totally overpowered party. It's designed specifically so you can go after those different endings, all of the different ones I'm still playing through to see. Now, we gotta talk about the music. You can't have a conversation about Chrono Trigger without mentioning its soundtrack. It's often described as one of the greatest video game soundtracks ever produced, and for good reason. But the story behind it is just as dramatic as the game's plot. The composer was Yasunori Mitsuda. At the time, he was just a sound programmer at Square and he was unhappy with his pay. He actually threatened to leave the company if they didn't let him compose music. His boss told him to write the score for Chrono Trigger, saying maybe his salary would go up. Mitsuda went all in. He composed music for the game, drawing on a personal collection of pieces he'd been working on for 2 years. He even slept in his studio for several nights, and he attributed certain pieces, like the ending theme, to inspiring dreams that he had. That man was pouring his soul into this project. And here's the part that gets me. In the middle of development, Mitsuda contracted stomach ulcers from overwork. He was pushing himself so hard that he got sick. So Nobuo Uematsu, the legendary Final Fantasy composer, had to step in and finish the remaining 10 tracks. Mitsuda was so dedicated that he returned to watch the ending with the staff before the game's release, and he cried when he saw the finished scene. That's the kind of passion that went into this game. You can hear it in every single track. Corridors of Time, Secret of the Forest. These are so much more than background music. They're essential to the storytelling. When you're wandering through a prehistoric jungle or floating through a futuristic city, the music sets the mood in a way that very few games have ever matched. The SNES sound chip was limited, but Mitsuda and Uematsu pushed it to its absolute limit. The Super Nintendo had 8 channels of audio, which meant you could have up to 8 different sounds playing at once. That might not sound like much, but when you hear the layered strings in Too Far Away Times, or the percussion in Battle with Magus, you realize what they accomplished with so little. Now, if you played this game in North America, you experienced the work of a guy named Ted Woolsey. He's a bit of a legend in the retro gaming community. Hironobu Sakaguchi gave him the job of translating the entire game into English and gave him roughly 30 days to do it. 30 days! For a game this massive with this much dialogue. He didn't have a modern translation team. He memorized scenarios and looked at drafts of commercial players' guides just to put the dialogue into context. He later said he would have preferred 2.5 months. And because of the attitude at the time that games were just for kids, his work was rushed even further. Nintendo of America censored some dialogue, removing references to things like alcohol and religion. It was a different era, and localization was seen as more of a checkbox than a creative process. And despite all that, Woolsey's translation is beloved. It gave characters like Frog a distinct personality. He gave Frog that old English dialect that just made him so memorable. "Thou art a worthy foe," even though he didn't speak that way in the original Japanese. It's a testament to his skill and that he was able to create such a great localization under some insane pressure. And he later said it was one of the most satisfying games he's ever worked on. And I think we can all agree his work is a huge part of why the game resonated with us so deeply. Imagine if we had gotten a dry, literal translation. The characters would have felt flat. The world would have just lost its charm, and Woolsey gave Chrono Trigger a voice, and that voice is still remembered decades later. Let's talk about how this game looks, because even by 1995 standards, it was stunning. Yeah, and I know the PlayStation came out in the US just 18 days after Chrono Trigger, ushering in a whole new era of 32-bit polygon graphics. But that's comparing apples to oranges, so I want to focus on the beauty of the 2D worlds in this game. The character sprites were designed by Akira Toriyama, who you probably know from Dragon Ball. His style is instantly recognizable. The big hair, bold colors, character designs that are simple but expressive. Every character in it feels distinct. It's like somehow you've seen them all before, somewhere else, and we're already familiar with them. Chrono's spiky red hair, Luca's geeky goggles, Frog's regal armor. They all pop off the screen. But it's not only the character designs. The environments are incredible. Each area has its own distinct visual identity. 65 million BC is lush and green, with giant ferns and dinosaurs. 2380 is cold and desolate, with broken buildings and a perpetual winter. 1080 is bright and medieval, with castles and forests. And the way the game transitions between these eras is seamless. The same locations look completely different depending on when you visit them. One thing that really impressed me was the animation. The Super Nintendo wasn't always known for fluid character movement, but Chrono Trigger managed it. The tech attack animations are particularly impressive. When Chrono uses Luminaire, the screen flashes and his sprite cycles through a bunch of poses in rapid succession. It's simple by today's standard, but at the time, it must have looked like magic. The enemy designs are also worth mentioning. Lavos, the final boss, is one of the most intimidating sprite-based creatures I've ever seen. It's this massive, spiked alien thing that feels genuinely threatening, and the way it transforms throughout the battle keeps you on your toes. Now, the Super Nintendo could only display 256 colors on screen at a time, which sounds incredibly limiting, but the artists at Square worked within those constraints and produced a pixel art style that still looks beautiful today. And boy, did they use every trick in the book. Color cycling, dithering, transparencies, and even the Super Nintendo's Mode 7 graphics, which is to say, the rotation and scaling of a background layer, to create visuals that punch way above the hardware's weight. So, let me come back to where I started. 25 years late to the party, sitting in my apartment during lockdown, I finally played Chrono Trigger. And I have to be honest, I didn't quite know what to think when I started playing. I'd been burned before by classic games that didn't quite hold up. Sometimes nostalgia clouds our judgment. But Chrono Trigger was different. And as I played, I kept noticing things that felt ahead of their time. The way the side quests integrated into the main story. The way characters developed over time. Let's take Frog's story for example. It's one of my favorite parts of the entire experience. There's a moment about halfway through the game that really got me. You're in the Middle Ages, and you've just retrieved the Masamune, the legendary sword named after Japan's greatest historical swordsmith, that can only be wielded by a true hero. And Frog, this little green guy who's been tagging along with you, he finally drops the act. His real name is Glenn, and he wasn't always a frog. He was a squire under a knight named Cyrus, a defender of Queen Line. They went after the dark mage Magus together, and Cyrus died in that fight, and Magus cursed Glenn, transforming him into a frog and flinging him off the mountain. And for 10 years after that, Glenn was consumed with regret and self-loathing, blaming himself for Cyrus's death. He changed his name to Frog and lived as a hermit in a remote, evil forest, too ashamed to face anyone. And here he was, standing in front of me, this little frog with a big sword, finally telling the truth. There's a line he delivers in the game that's always stuck with me. I am no pet. I am an accomplished swordsman, green as I may appear. That line hit different after I knew what he'd been through. Here's a guy who lost everything. His mentor, his human form, his identity. He's still fighting. He's still protecting his queen, still carrying that sword. I just remember sitting there watching the dialogue scroll by, feeling this unexpected pain of empathy for a cartoon frog. The game doesn't beat you over the head with his tragedy, it just lets it sit with you. And that's when I realized Chrono Trigger was an RPG that actually cared about its characters. The game also respected your intelligence and didn't hold your hand. There's another moment about halfway through where you're supposed to figure out you need to go back in time to stop something from happening. And the game doesn't spell it out for you. It trusts you to make the connection. So by the time I reached the end, I understood. I understood why people have been telling me for years that this was the greatest RPG ever made. I mean, there wasn't just one aspect to it that was strong. It was everything. The combat, the story, the music, the art, the multiple endings. It all came together in a way that few games that I've played have ever managed. And yeah, I felt a stabbing pain of regret. I now wish I would have experienced this back in the day as a kid. I wish I would have been there in 1995, trading secrets with my friends, debating which ending was the best, arguing over who was the most powerful party member. But I also felt grateful that I finally got to experience it all, even decades later. So when you look at all of it, the dream team of developers, the revolutionary battle system, the mind-bending time travel, that incredible soundtrack, the legendary translation, the stunning visuals, it's easy to see why Chrono Trigger is considered one of the greatest video games ever made. The game sold over 5 million copies worldwide across all of its re-releases, and it consistently tops lists of the best RPGs of all time. It was a product of its era that also defined the era. It proved that RPGs could be a joy to play and emotionally resonant. It's a game that decades later, to me, still feels fresh and totally worth exploring today. So, if you've never played it, do yourself a favor. Fire it up on an emulator, or pick up one of the re-releases. Experience it for yourself, and I promise it will still be just as good as when it was first released in 1995. And if you were lucky enough to play this one back in the day, what was your favorite memory from the game? I'd love to hear about it in the comments below, and I really do read every one. Alright my friends, this is the Retro Gaming Boss signing out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.